Cecil John Rhodes, empire builder, dreamer, and financier. This man, in his own way, was a colossus of his time in the subcontinent of Southern Africa. Among his many bequests, he bestowed the renowned Rhodes Scholarship, which is awarded annually on merit to British Commonwealth, American, German, and South African students to study at Oxford University.
It shows the progress, man. My generation, man, I love it. It's like, you know, hopefully things like racism, you know, will be gone soon. I know that's like a crazy topic.
For me, Rhodes Must Fall started a conversation that we needed to have, and it started one, not just about race equality, it started one about Rhodes' legacy, which I think was a really important one to have for me personally, as well as for the student community.
Most people know nothing about Cecil Rhodes, and so when people were trying to defend him during RMF, it was very easy because there was no baseline of knowledge for people to contest them on. So one of the most powerful arguments put forward by the pro-Rhodes lobby was that we're judging him by the standards of our time rather than his time. Well, Rhodes was a reviled figure in his time. These arguments, these sort of off-the-shelf defences that were deployed during Rhodes Must Fall, I think they were emblematic of a much broader debate about what is the function of history. Is it there to make us feel good about ourselves? Or is it there to make us challenge ourselves, challenge the country we come from, challenge the ideas we have now, countries that see their history as places where they ask difficult questions of themselves and their nation. They tend to be, in my view, nations that have a healthier relationship to the past.
When you look at press coverage of Rhodes Must Fall, everyone's talking about the statue. Like the Listening Project, it's about the statue. Like the donors, they care about the statue. Basically, like, every white person that cares about Rhodes Must Fall cares about the statue being taken off a wall. But then when you look at the demands of Rhodes Must Fall, there were like 7 demands, I think. I think this was number 2. The statue was the symbolic point. It was the kind of material environment point. And what it represented was the racism that students experience all the time at Oxford without having a recourse for that.
It is not about the statue only, okay? So the statue is symptomatic of a broader problem within Oxford. There is a lot that Oxford is implicated in. And Oxford has never once said that we acknowledge, you know, because people undervalue the importance of a simple acknowledgement that they were involved in injustice.
Extend up the Zambezi, railway, telegraph, colonization, there is no limit. The Cape to Cairo.
I will not sensitize it. I will say it as he said it. Rhodes to my people. I prefer land to niggers. I prefer land to niggers.
And Oral College has said that it makes a sharp distinction between condoning what Rhodes stood for and having his statue, and that it by no means glorifies it. What do you think about that?
We think that that's a completely false distinction. I think the gravity of Cecil Rhodes's crimes and the way in which they're still shaping relations not just in South Africa but all over the global South means you cannot draw that distinction. It's a false one and we reject it completely.
In its statements, and in the statements of its leaders and authorities, including its provost, continuously refers to Rhodes as a diplomat, as a businessman, as a benefactor. This is deeply offensive for me because it means that Oriel College is saying to me that diplomacy entails the raiding of an entire people's land, that diplomacy is holding guns to people's heads.
I think the RMF, despite the fact that the statues ended up staying, did a lot to spark a national debate really about not just the traditional, oh, these universities are elite because they take from certain schools, but also these universities have a dark history links to colonialism and oppression.
By 1880, Rhodes, then 27 years old, had become a powerful force in the diamond mining industry. And in that year, he founded the De Beers Mining Company, named after Johannes Nicolaas de Beer, on whose farm, Vooruitzicht, the diamond rush had taken place.
If there's been any kind of great success, it's been the idea that we don't see these statues now as being something which are just sort of natural, that they were like rock formations, that they appeared when the earth cooled. There were political decisions to put them there, and that there were all sorts of negotiations, often financial negotiations, that led to their creation. We don't see them as natural anymore. We understand that they're part of a process, and that process, it is legitimate to challenge.
Can't you realize that you have the power to spend the money of your company in acquiring new countries? Penetration, expansion, the expansion of England?
Words, Mr. Rhodes. The ravings of a gambler.
If we insist on our heroes being pure, we aren't going to have any. Rhodes was not racist. He didn't hold black Africans in general contempt. He did not view them as biologically inferior and incapable of cultural development. While often ruthless in his choice of means, Rhodes was a prodigious entrepreneur who used his wealth for public purposes, rather to develop the region's economy and to build a worldwide community of public leaders through his scholarship legacy.
I think we over-egg what some of these people do in terms of the heroism. What did Rhodes do that was heroic, apart from give to an already rich institution in order to help fund what he said at the time was going to be imperial projects? He wanted to create the next generation of imperialists. So I don't see how a lot of these people are heroes in the first place, but then saying, kind of minimalizing the things that they did, the horrific things that they did, by saying, oh, well, they have some things maybe that are wrong, but no one's perfect. It's like, yeah, no one's perfect. I haven't caused any genocides recently, though. I'd hope most of you watching haven't either.
If people at a university aren't prepared to demonstrate the sort of generosity of spirit which Nelson Mandela showed towards Rhodes and towards history, if they're not prepared to embrace all those values which are contained in the most important book for any undergraduate, Karl Popper's Open Society, if they're not prepared to embrace those issues, then maybe they should think about being educated elsewhere. But I hope they'll embrace those issues and engage in a debate.
I thought Rhodes Must Fall was about having an open society. I think it was brilliantly exemplified the idea that we need to have an open discussion. Now, if this is not just about a statue, there are plaques, as you know, in Oxford that describe Rhodes fundamentally as a great guy. This is about putting forward one version of history. To have a discussion and a debate about whether that version of history needs to be mediated, needs to be confronted, maybe that version of history needs to be denounced as a lie. The idea that that is some form of rejection of an open society, I think that's a fanciful reading of Karl Popper.
All problems are simple on paper, Miss Carpenter. When obstacles stand in the way of
ambition,
progress, ultimately peace under one government, those obstacles must be removed by force if need be.
If you think that, then it would be better for South Africa if you'd never been born. You would turn a country that might be a paradise into a hell. The future would judge you not as the man who made and saved the South African people, but as the man who crucified them.
I think the UK media's reaction to Rhodes Must Fall was largely predictable. There were sections of the British press who were always looking for these sort of culture war stories, and students being oversensitive is one of their favourite tropes. I thought there was more intelligent debate within some of the more intellectual magazines. There was in The Guardian, but then I write for The Guardian, so I'm biased. But I thought it was pretty predictable, and I think it's about a very old-fashioned idea that you can patronise young people for having beliefs. But I think that that's become weaponised by a culture war mentality, which is about defending anything that is seen as traditional against any assault, as if this is fashionable, as if these changing cultural mores are an affectation that can be brushed away. And I think it's extremely naive to think about them in those ways.
I want to just comment on places calling themselves institutionally racist in general, as I feel like it's almost become a bit of a fashion thing now. Like the Met Police has declared themselves institutionally racist for I think 2 years in a row. Okay, great. So what's the next step from that? Would be my question. I know the Oxford Union declared itself institutionally racist. I don't know if this was before or after the colonial cocktail. But, okay, you declare yourself institutionally racist. Where is your 5-point plan to make yourself institutionally anti-racist? Because if I don't see that, I'm not really going to be joining the rounds of applause. Because of that, and because of the way that it had been completely ignored by the university, it seemed like there was kind of room to do something new with that, kind of take the lessons from it and try and get people engaged in the same debates. And open them up as much as possible. So the purpose of Common Ground was to try and engage people in talking about decolonisation, in talking about racism at the university, and class as well to an extent.
A ritual, say, around recognising the harm committed by slavery, within the context of the university. And it could be, we now celebrate Black History Month, and I hope it will become embedded as a ritual. But we could also have a ritual around recognising the legacy, the harm that Rhodes has done. And it could be, it's not about celebration. It's saying there's a service, we'll have a memorial service, or we could, and it actually would, for me, it would make me feel more comfortable in the space of the university, because I would, for the first time I'd say, the university is not acknowledging that I have I suffer mentally when I walk past Rhodes House, less so now actually, because the students have brought the issue to the fore than when I was a student in the 80s, when it was never mentioned. And I had to go in there to use the library, which I love, the space of the library. But on the other hand, no one, you'd walk past portraits of Rhodes, no one mentioned it, and that is really not recognizing your humanity and the fact that your humanity, it's, you as a human has suffered as a result of this, of this man's act.
And to teach the truth, and to start teaching the truth, and to start even teaching, knowing what the British Empire is, rather than everyone in the country knowing divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. It's more important that people know that we killed more than 3 million people in India than we know exactly the order in which with a famine under Churchill, that we know exactly the order in which Henry VIII's wives died, right? The teaching of history, everything. There's this ridiculous kind of Game of Thrones idea of history as medieval castles and battling the French and all this kind of stuff, and they don't touch upon the actual very dark elements of Britain's recent history, which have helped make it to the country it is today in terms of wealth and the rest of it. And so, yeah, there needs to be a complete paradigm shift in how things are taught in order to have any meaningful progress.
To understand the empire, we need to get away from the idea that the way to view history is a balance sheet. How much good versus how much bad, and we weigh it in a scales and we decide, okay, the empire was good. That's a ridiculous way. I really mean that, with a ridiculous way of looking at the past. You get into these perverse discussions where you try to work out how many railways make up for the Amritsar massacre. how much the spread of English concepts of law and civic society make up for the slave trade. This is a silly way of looking at the past. We don't know enough, we don't teach enough and learn enough and discuss the empire enough to even come to a balance sheet decision, even if we thought it was a good idea to do so. I think we need to talk about the empire as part of British history, not a marginal additional subject, not something you do as a specialist module, but part of British history. It's absolutely fundamental. Our national drink is tea, which comes from China. We grew it in India. It's sweetened with cane sugar from Asia that we grew in the Caribbean. Our language is infused with words that come from nations that were brought into Britain's sphere of influence. Even the word blighty, the word that a lot of people on the sort of nationalist right use to describe Britain when they're getting emotional and sentimental about it, as we all do from time to time, even the word blighty is a corruption of a Hindu word. So this idea that the empire existed out there, that we sent things out, and that all the traffic was one way, or it was controllable. Ideas, people, language, foods, cuisines, cultures, all sorts of things move backwards and forwards. The empire is an integral part of British history. And seeing it in those terms, and seeing it for what it is, and seeing it as part of that exercise of not regarding history as a warm bath, a place to feel good about yourselves, I think they're the fundamental shifts we need to make. Why should the past be a form of emotional escape, of nostalgic escape?